It's October 16th, 1996. We're here in San Francisco at the Holocaust Oral History Project interviewing JANINA Swift again. My name is Gail Moscoso. My co-interviewer is Simon Levine, and our videographer is Sean Simplicio. Welcome again. JANINA, before we go back to where we left off last time, could you please give us again your father's name, your mother's name and maiden name, and your siblings, your brother's name?
My father was Tadeusz Karol Oppenheim.
Spell his first name.
T-A-D-E-U-S-Z.
T-A-Z-E-U.
It's like Tadeusz, yeah, it's only Polish spelling of the name. And Karol is K-A-R-O-L. That's in Poland, male spelling of a name Karol. Karl, basically. My mother's name was Susanna, Z-U-N-N-A. Zuckerwar, Z-U-C-K-W-A-R. My brother's name is Antoni Kazimierz, I will spell it for you, Oppenheim. A-N-T-O-N-I. And Kazimierz is K-A-Z-I-M-I-E-R-Z. That is a Polish spelling of the name Kazimierz.
Could you go back and tell us in what part of Warsaw that you lived when you were a child?
We lived in a center, near the Grand Station, the railway, and near hotels, and however, a little bit away of it, far enough to make the street quieter and some trees, and not within a couple of blocks of the center of town.
Was it, were there other families in it? Was it the family dwellings that you lived in?
No, there was a 6 or 7 story building with the top story just being lofts used. You see, in Poland, you had to dry your laundry under a roof because of frost or rain or things. So the top story was used when people did their wash. They took it up there and they did drying of the laundry. They also, just below the drying, they had little units where you could store things that you didn't need or didn't want in your apartment. My family lived on 3rd floor, and they there were 2 huge apartments that took the whole building, and the one belonged to my mother and my family. Across the hallway there lived my grandmother with 1 daughter and 1 son. The son was a bachelor and the daughter was left by her husband. The husband disappeared. So she had that was that age, the only place for a daughter to go is to go back home to her parents.
How far was that from the Warsaw Ghetto?
Well, walk. I'm trying to, I don't know by miles, but I would think it was probably 1.5 2 miles. You had to, the main streets in Warsaw, where there was the crossroads, where the Grand Railway Station was Aleje Jerozolimskie and Marszałkowska Street. And we lived, couple of minutes from there. If you went Marszałkowska Street to the end of the street, you came to a park. And on the other side of the park, that was mixed area, Jewish and non-Jewish, and then it developed into where it was mostly Jewish. Now, it was not closed or defined by anything. It was, probably it was a cheaper area. Because the Jewish people that lived in that area were not wealthy, not well educated. They preferred to speak Jewish and do their shopping and live there. Well-educated Jewish people or wealthy lived all over Warsaw. They lived, everywhere. So there was no, it was really not defined. It kind of developed because people liked shopping and they had their schools and their rabbis and their little shops where they could kosher food, and also they spoke, many of the older people. Young people spoke usually more than one language. However, the older people, some of them speak only Jewish, very little Polish. I remember that when I went to visit there, I sometimes had to ask a lady. Young women did not ask a man, or girls did not ask. So I would go to a lady and ask her, and I couldn't communicate because she only spoke Jewish. So I had to ask somebody else. Or she would call somebody who would answer my question, because there were elderly people that only spoke Jewish.
Were you aware of the ghetto as a little girl? I mean, do you remember when you first became aware of that?
I don't really can pinpoint it, because in my house people came, there were Protestants, Catholic, Jewish, Greek Orthodox, people from England, from Sweden, from France, from Vienna, from, all. And there was really it's strange, but asking people their religion or something was impolite. When I came to the United States and people asked me what church you go to, I was taken aback. Why? What business? I mean, it's private. Why are they asking me that? Although that is after the war, and after all I went through, I still, in such a situation, didn't expect to be asked what church I go to.
Well, how would you answer them? Or would you answer them?
They said, I went to Catholic church or nothing, or I asked him why you ask, or so. Eventually I got used to it, that the church in America was a fighting church, that there was still, you see, in a country that was 85% or more Catholic, nobody had to fight anything. And in schools, we had we were taught religion, but they usually we had 6 periods of teaching, math, English, Polish, geography, whatever. They made religion the last period, the 6th period, so that they will divide us. And the people that were Jewish will go to a rabbi, the Protestants will go to some Protestant person, and Catholics would stay with the Catholic priest. As it happened in some years, I remember that the Catholic priest was boring terribly. So the priest would find himself, instead of 20 girls, with 15, and glamorous Presbyterian would find himself with 10 instead of 5. Or we would go and occasionally we would go and find out what the rabbi has to say, especially when he was young and good looking. So we would go and listen to the rabbi. And they had one problem. We had one a Turkish, or I think he was Turkish boy or something, and they couldn't provide him with whatever religion it was. So they approached the embassy, and they didn't have a religious. So they sent some young man, and he simply read him for an hour the text. And that was his, because you not only had to study religion, but you had to get a grade to get your matriculation out of high school. So you had to have a grade on it. So he simply read him and did some kind of an examination. We had to study religion, but everybody was provided by law with whatever religion they were. And a friend of mine who was Presbyterian had an experience in his classroom when he didn't know an answer, whatever object it was, not religious, math or something. He poked his friend and he said, "Tell me what I don't know." And his friend said, "Are you forsaking Luther in his teaching? If you are, then I tell you." This kind of an experience. So obviously we were not taking it too seriously.
Did you study German? Did you study German then, early in school?
Yes.
From the time you were small?
We had to study at least 2 languages, French and, of course, we studied Latin, and then later, about junior high school, we'll start Latin, and then in Lyceum, in high school, we will start Greek. Latin gives you a lot of background for learning languages. It's a very good thing to learn. We had three type of high school, basically. When you went from gymnasium to high school, you made a choice whether you want to go to humanistic, where they will teach you languages and Latin and literature, or you went to a science where you had chemistry and physics and mathematics, or there was strictly mathematic engineers. But you made those choices already. You didn't study. You had your Polish history and your Polish language, but the majority of subjects and the stress was on your chosen field, whether it was science, engineering, mathematics, or humanistic, which will be. Then you continue study Greek and Latin, and usually another language, maybe English, and or Italian, and literature was, yeah. You had to make choices by the time you went to school.
You mentioned to me pre-war that you were going to have a coming out party, and you were going to go to Paris, to France. Could you give us tell us a little bit about that and how you felt?
Well, basically, both my brother and I, in the times when we were in school, when you were bright, they didn't have programs for bright students. And since we learned a little bit ahead of schedule, they basically skipped us a grade or two. Or we were very young. And so we were going to graduate at young. Now, and my brother, he knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted to be an engineer. My mother had dreams of a lawyer or a doctor, but he had absolutely no interest in it. Where my mother got the idea, I don't know, because everybody in the family was an engineer. So why she didn't see it coming, I don't understand. But my brother knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted to build something, preferably airplanes, and that was it. I thought of architecture. I thought that I could, but I was young. My mother's idea what I should do was I should get beautifully dressed, because as long as I was in school I had to wear uniforms. I was going to get a fantastic wardrobe, and she wanted a little bit the same education she had. She spoke several languages. She felt that that was necessary. So she wanted me to go for a few months to France and learn French, and to go to England and learn English. German I already did because of my German governess. And traveling, speaking languages, seeing, that was supposed to prepare me for the splendid marriage, which was the thing she wanted for me. She didn't. My brother, yes, he was going to get education, but I didn't need to, because I had a big dowry coming, and somebody will snap me up and I will live happily ever after. I didn't need to make money ever. I never will have to work. Little did we know.
You said you had a German governess?
Yes.
When was that? How old were you when you...
Well, we always had governesses and nurses. When we started, there was a polyclinic in Vienna, which trained nurses for babies. They had some medical training, they were very highly. Then once you were out of your diapers, you got a governess. We started with a French governess, and my brother learned to speak French very well from. However, I was only about 2.5 when my mother decided to change. Now we both spoke French. Decided to change to a German governess. Well, I don't know who revolted most, but we decided that instead of she teaching us German, we taught her Polish. And we were supposed to, at dinner, we were supposed to speak either French or German, or, to practice the language. But we didn't. And I had her till I was 12, 13 years old. And she was part of the family. And for example, when I went to school, I was not supposed to walk on the streets unchaperoned. Well, I hated that with vengeance. So when she came to collect me from school, I was either hiding or I managed to run away before she came and went home by myself, leave her sitting in front of school. I hated being escorted to and from school.
That was for social reasons, that socially you were...
Yeah, and also, I had to pass from my house to my school, I had to pass that Grand Central Station, and there were all kinds of things going on the street. People were selling and buying, and I imagined prostitutes and all kinds of, people came from outside Warsaw, so the first, anything for sale was offered. And also social too, that young ladies didn't run around unescorted.
What did your father do?
My father was an industrialist. That means he owned a lot of brick factories and businesses. By education, he was an engineer. He had few degrees. He had a degree in philosophy, business administration, 2 in engineering. He had chemistry and ceramics, and 1 more. Business administration, I think, which made him very well equipped to run his business, his brick factories, his other factories. He spoke few languages also, so he was quite wealthy. He had 2 sisters, and so he became in charge of the family business. Also during his administration of the business, he increased it. bought and sold possessions.
That was a business that his father started?
I imagined, yes. I don't know. You know, my father died when I was 7 years old. So, but I imagine, yes, it has to, because his sisters were given money from some of them, not all of them, but some of the businesses he ran, which must have been part of their inheritance. He was running the business, but they were getting some income out of it as, women. They were very unusual because they were well educated. They had degrees. At that time, that was practically unheard of a woman to have any degree past grammar school.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that they were educated was... my mother, frankly, didn't know what to do with them. She was totally flabbergasted because they were not the type of person that she was.
Who ran the business after your father died? Your mother?
My mother, first what happened was there were two things together. One was the depression and my father's illness. The depression, which hurt Europe very strongly, and my father was at the same time had his first heart attack and became very ill. He was ill for 3 years before he died. And the business was run by whoever, his clerks, his plant manager, Of course, a lot of it was a mess. After my father died, my mother went into mourning in a very exaggerated way. I mean, both my brother and I were dressed in black. We were not allowed to listen to music. We were not allowed to have friends. And she was totally immersed into mourning the death of my father. And finally her relatives, and especially people that worked for my father, came and said, "Lady, you're about to lose everything. This is, the business is, nobody ran it, nobody's buying anything, nothing. The industry, especially heavy industry, is at a standstill." So my mother had to wake up. She had to go and start saving everything. And for a woman that her bigger worry was what kind of hat to wear and what friends meet in a coffee house for gossip, to roll up her sleeve and start doing business at a time that men laughed at her. Because when my father died, she was 29. So when a pretty young woman walked and said, "I'm running this and this," the people laughed at her. It was a joke. Men were not used to women in business. But with help of some attorneys and good people that worked for my father, we had people that started working for my father's boys and stayed with the family till the death, till they retired or died. They helped my mother and she managed to do it. She became a businesswoman. As a matter of fact, she developed passion for it. I think that was one of the reasons why she didn't remarry. Because she got the feeling of freedom that women could have. She was her own boss, Nobody could tell her anything, and she didn't want to lose that. She just wanted it to continue. It's a pretty heavy feeling, you know, for a woman in early 30s to be boss not only of her life but a business, and she worked very hard.
You said that you had a lot of people go through your home, you know, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, French, German, Greek.
Yeah.
Why was that? For the business? Or?
Probably some. But you see, also it was visitors from abroad. Sometimes they were, like, my mother's sister married a Danish. Well, they went to Protestant church. Sometimes they were friends, sometimes they were relatives, sometimes they were just visiting. Social life too.
In 1939, you were 17 years old, yes?
Yes.
Were you in school or did you work?
No, you see, that was end of a summer vacation. That was the end of the war broke out. I was just out of school. The school never started in 19, because it was September.
To go back to when you were in jail in Westerfensen, in Dagmar,
Oh, Westerhouse.
Westerhouse. You were with Louisa.
Louisa Bayer.
Now, could you explain who Louisa is?
Louisa, well, I met Louisa in jail. When I went in Denmark in jail, there were 2 Danish women. And since I didn't speak Danish, a little bit, but very little, and I had, of course, a very strong accent, I knew that inside jail I would be an outcast if they thought I was German. So as I walked into the room, I said, I don't speak Danish, but I'm not German, I'm Polish. And Louisa, who heard me answering the guard, so they asked me something, and I thought I was German. She was petrified that they stuck a German with her. So then you had to watch everything you say and do and so on. So she was greatly relieved. But she still watched me. And she was careful, but after a while she decided that I was okay. Louisa was well known in Denmark for many reasons. Her uncle got a Nobel Prize in Science, and there is a statue to his in a park in Copenhagen. Her family was very well known, very educated. Another uncle was a very well known painter. Her great grandfather was an admiral in the Navy and won a battle with Nelson. The Danes consider him a great hero. And in Louisa's house there was a crystal set in a padded box, the kind you take on a ship, and there were cut glasses, and that belonged to that great grandfather. This, from the point of view of social and education, she was a very well educated lady. She married Christian Brondum, who was a colonel in the Danish army, a very handsome, very elegant man, and they had a daughter, and she was taken by the Gestapo because they tried. Christian worked in the underground and was taken to London by night and came back by parachute and kept organizing the Danish underground. He was very high in the underground, and the Gestapo was very anxious to catch him. They couldn't get him, so they took Louisa. And he did something amazing. They knew who he was. He knew, the Germans, the Gestapo knew that he was very high in the underground and that he was one of the bosses. But they also were executing the worst Germans or Gestapo. When they took Louisa, he found out who was the Obersturmführer who was in charge of Louisa's case. And he used to, at night, drive somewhere all over Copenhagen and make a phone call to that man. Not Copenhagen, but Denmark, actually, the whole Sjælland. And he would phone him and say, now, if one hair gets touched on her, you dead. And he, with great regularity, each night made that phone call. Don't you dare to hit her or touch her or do anything. And apparently it worked, because she was never beaten up, never. She didn't know where he was, because that was the general rule, that you only told people what they had to know. You didn't have to know, you didn't tell them where you went, where you were.
You said that you, when you were there, that you developed a jail mentality, and that you fell in with the wrong group of people.
No, that's not necessarily falling with the wrong, but you do. In jail, I can see why guarding jails is difficult. Because the minute you get locked in that cage and there is that person with the key and that person that can with impunity do anything to you, you develop a mentality. You automatically feel more common with the other prisoners than with the jailer, regardless of everything else. There is that mentality, them versus us. That happens to you, you know. I of course, it was much stronger during the war, because who sat in the jail were the best of the Danish intellectuals, freedom fighters, you know. So of course were us versus them. But I would think that that will to a certain degree work in any jail. Because that is not only who is with jail with you, but the fact that they have the power, they have the key, they can hurt you and get away with it. And there's nothing you can do about it.
How long were you in jail there?
It's funny, I would forget that date. I came after the end of the war, but I went in. Few months. I don't remember. Few months.
Did you do anything that in the jail there that you were ever ashamed of?
In the Danish jail? I don't think so, because I was angry with myself when that Gestapo man or that German that I smacked in a restaurant in Poland threatened me. I was very scared. I was annoyed with myself being that scared. I was petrified. Also, when they Danish underground threatened to come in jail after the war ended because the Gestapo wasn't letting go, and the Gestapo said, we're going to put dynamite and explode us ourselves and the whole prison with us. I was scared, but that's about as far as it went. There wasn't much to be really to. In Warsaw, when I escaped, I felt, which I didn't recognize then, and I'm giving it the wrong name because I didn't have a name for it then. I had the survival guilt. I felt that all the people that were with me, that I knew are going to be killed, that I should have done something to help them out. It was nonsense. I mean, it was total fluke that I got out. It didn't make any sense, but I had the feeling guilt. Why should I be the one that survived? And I knew they were going to be killed.
Is that when you were coming back from eastern Poland?
No, that is when I was caught in Warsaw and I escaped from the jail.
Wow.
Over the wall. Over.
When you got out of jail in Denmark, you then you said you were brought back into the underground, or well, not brought back, but you were made to work for the underground again.
Well, the people that were, the way we were caught were because we were leaving Denmark to Sweden, because my mother and my aunt didn't believe my uncle that the war is ending and they should stay, that they're not going to get, they were afraid they're going to be taken to concentration camp, executed. They would not stay. My uncle said, the war is ending, stay where you are, but they wouldn't. So the underground was approached and they said yes, because they were Gestapo sniffing around. There were suddenly all kinds of people appeared who didn't speak Danish, who claimed to be Danish, and somebody must have informed. It was impossible to find out who informed, so it was very frightening. It could be the person you were sitting next. person you were talking today. And when we were escaping, we were caught on the sea by German Navy. A dirty work, this is what the Germans keep telling you. We were in the army, we didn't do anything, we were in the Navy. Well, they were catching and delivering people to the Gestapo, so what else? They knew what we were doing. They knew very well what they were doing. Also, the room we were in had holes in the wall because they put us all together to listen to what we talk about, to find out something. Is that, again, not a very noble way of dealing? And we were grabbed by the Navy. Then they delivered us to the Gestapo.
No, when you came out of jail, though, in Denmark, and you said that someone from the underground approached you and
Well,
asked you to work with them again.
there were more people than only underground. There were people from the intelligence, there were people from that was basically from intelligence, from Allied, British, American, Polish. I got myself partly into it because I was looking for a way to help the Polish refugees in the camp and contacted people who could help me and created such a furor that the intelligence got alarmed and tried to find out what am I doing and on whose behalf. You have to remember that Bornholm at that time was occupied by the Russians, and both American and British intelligence were petrified of Russian infiltration. So when I started stepping on everybody's toes to help my refugees, they got interested and alarmed. Therefore, I was approached by one of the agents to basically to find out what I was doing, and then when I told them what I was doing, that I was helping the refugees, then they wanted me to help.
You said that you had a number of nicknames. Could you tell us some of those?
Okay. We'll start with the early ones. First, my brother. I'm not very proud My brother called me for years, stupid child. And I had to tolerate it with fury and vengeance. Then his friends started calling me, and I was already being a sub-teen, and I was sensitive to young men calling me stupid child. So I raised such a furor that they called me golden child. They couldn't get away. I wouldn't let them get away with stupid child, but they called me the golden child, which I hated because I knew that they were saying golden, but they were thinking stupid. So it didn't, work very well.
Could you tell us that how you would say that in Polish, those two nicknames?
Głupie dziecko, that's stupid child, I złote dziecko is golden child. Then when I was swimming before the war, I had a green swimsuit and I swam in a breaststroke and I was called frog, żaba. Then I had as a teenager, I liked to wear my brother's clothes, and I was called garçon pays blasé. Then during the war I was called Hanka, which is a diminutive from a name. I was called John, John. And then I had, of course, a lot of false names.
Could you tell some of them? Do you remember any of them?
The last one was Guralska. You usually kept your first name because it was too easy to trap you with. So you kept your first name, so it was Janina. Guralska. Then I was Czarnoska. Then I was I'm trying to remember them in sequence, but it's very hard. Czachowska. Romanowska. I can't remember. I have about 4 or 5 more. They are, though, listed on when I made American citizenship. You have to list all the name you used, and I listed more of them. Rutkowska. Few more. Some of them that I didn't use for a length of time, I can't remember. If I took a pencil and I tried to remember where I was at what time, I probably could remember them. But there's so many.
When you spoke about forging Spider's demobilization papers, and when you spoke about it, it sounded, you've got a stamp here, and you were able to get.
Yeah, that was an Allied military mission right after the war.
How about papers that you made during the war, though? Could you tell us more about those kinds of papers and how you learned to do that?
I didn't really learn. I was just used because I could imitate anybody. When my brother was studying, I used to amuse myself when he was copied his papers and he had to stop in the middle. He had it written out and then he was making a clean copy to hand it to his professor. It amused me to copy the next few lines in his handwriting and leave it there. And my brother, who knew exactly where he stopped, would look at it and he would be totally confused because there were 2-3 lines that he didn't remember. And I used to watch him from a distance, having a great fun. I could copy anybody's handwriting. I remember when my father's signature, I didn't do it to force any paper, it just amused me to copy it. And I could copy my mother's signature. I could copy my governess's handwriting. And occasionally I will leave notice in somebody's handwriting just for fun, and people will get confused, and I thought it was great sport. And I don't remember how young I was, but I always liked drawing things, and I had this ability to copy things. So. I used it to create confusion.
You mentioned about that red seal on how they used an egg to transfer the ink from a real document to a false document.
There were many ways of doing
Can you tell
it,
us some of the other ways?
but there were many ways. You got, in those times, you had those little boxes which you open it, there was a pad, and you put ink on it, and then you stamp the stamp on it from the pad, There were, in the underground, they used many ways. They had engravers make a stamp. They would take a stamp and change it a little bit. Occasionally they would confuse the issue by just making a cut, like the stamp was worn out by use and therefore it looked a little different. It was, especially where some numbers were something that the underground wasn't sure about, they were destroyed partly and it looked like it was an accident, which it wasn't, but they needed the change. What you needed was the ink and somebody who could make the stamp. The other ways of doing it was, which was more difficult, certain things were done by hand. You used a very fine instruments to copy certain things or change dates. The best way really of getting foolproof instruments was to get an original instrument, a piece of paper or a form, and change it. So, just like the today forged papers, forged passports. I have recently had my papers stolen, and I'm sure they are forged by now. Somebody's using them. The other way of doing this was photocopy. With a very skillful photographer, they could do it. Very skillful. After you made the papers, especially if they were, let's say, pre-war papers, you had to use your imagination and artistry to make it appear old. Rub it on the floor, walk on it, bend it, put a little grease on it, make it appear that, yes, that paper is 3, 4, 5 years old. It hasn't been done 5 minutes ago.
You were in jail how many times?
Basically twice. First time in Warsaw in 1942, I escaped, and second time in Denmark, 1944-45, when the war ended.
Were you ever beaten?
Yes.
Why?
Meanness.
Just meanness.
Basically, it wasn't interrogation. It was just brutality. It was the nature of the way prisoners were treated. I think that Luisa, because of her husband, was one of the few prisoners that was not beaten. And things were, of course, much worse in Polish jails or in Europe, in Eastern Europe. It was from prison to concentration camp was tremendous difference in how they treated people.
Were you beaten in both prisons?
No. In Denmark, it was towards the end of the war. The Germans were already scared by that time. There were no execution. They didn't dare to have an execution because they were already retreating from Russia. Germany was bombed to smithereens. They were running everywhere. They didn't dare. That was why when the war ended, they wouldn't let the prisoners out because they were worried, the Gestapo was worried about their own skin. And they kept the prisoners as hostages so they don't get their necks wrung and they don't get hung right there and there. That was their effort on the part of the Gestapo to have some hostages. Till they got the underground so angry that they said, you let our Red Cross come in or we coming in, and we won't leave one person alive. Even the Danes got mad because the best what was in Denmark was in that prison. So even the humane, phlegmatic Danes had enough.
Did anybody help you escape?
In Warsaw?
Yeah.
After I was, yes, very much so. After I was outside the jail, I was in a compound where they were sorting out the possession of the prisoners and people that were executed and people that were packed in trains and minus their luggage. That luggage was in big warehouses sorted out. Usable shoes that were shipped to Germany, usable clothes, whatever. You know, people had jewelry, they had all kinds of things. They took everything with them. And their clothes were examined if they have any sewn diamonds or gold or money. And those warehouses worked 24 hours a day. So they had also, there was a very strange situation. They were outside the jail, but the prison guards still worked the prison perimeter on the outside. There was guards working prison perimeter inside the walls and outside the walls. And those men that work in those warehouses at night, they were protected. They had they were working for the Germans. They were protected by working for the Germans. And the guards were not allowed to go inside, partly probably because there was a lot of valuables there. And the people that work were not allowed at night to be outside the building. So it was kind of a wild situation. When I escaped, and I sat on the wall there making my decisions, which, as I told you, I didn't think I would get out alive, but I just, shoot me, I'm not going on being executed like a cow, you know. I saw those buildings, there was light, there were people. I didn't know who they were. I could have walked into Gestapo headquarters, but I decided to take a chance. So when I got off the wall and went there and knocked on the door, those people immediately knew, because I didn't realize how bad I looked. I was bloody and, you know. I told them a story that I got lost wandering, which was nonsense because the whole area was surrounded and they knew immediately that I escaped and that. And I went in. There were probably about 20 people there. I had some discussion that some of them were saying, and it was true, that if they catch us hiding somebody, they're going to shoot us all. And the Germans did it with regularity. They did it every time they caught those workmen helping anybody. They shot them all with the person they caught. But they said, no, we have to help her to get out. And how are we going to get me out of there? Okay, I'm in, but how am I getting out? So they decided that when the workmen come in every 8 hours, so the morning group will come in and the night worker, I will walk out with the night workers. So somebody provided me with a coat, somebody gave me things to hide my beaten up face, and in the middle of the group that the Germans were not counting so well, either that or one of the persons stayed, didn't go out, so the number will, you know, tally. There were, let's say, 27 workers, 27 came in, 27. But one of the women stayed and then tried to get out later.
How did you get out of the compound? Were these people prisoners or did they live in the city?
No, they lived in a city and they had papers. And theoretically, the Germans were supposed to, each person was supposed to. But the people had a piece of paper and this kind of, and walk out. And they really didn't look, you know, it was, let's face it, who wants to go there? You know, even to work, that wasn't something that they were doing. Nobody wanted to go there.
Yeah.
It was dangerous, it was, you see, there was one thing with the Germans that worked. Let's say that there was some slip, something went wrong, and the Germans made look stupid, incompetent, cruel. They had a very simple solution so the war wouldn't get up. They executed everybody. Everybody got thrown in a truck under machine guns, taken out, executed, and you know, the attitude was few more, few less, who cares? It was, they wouldn't let a word of, so when you work in a place like that, it was very dangerous.
How did you get out of the community? Where was this jail?
Well, this jail was in a, the women took me out quite a bit. And actually I forgot who, whether they were the men or the women. Somebody gave me a little money for street. I, of course, didn't have anything. I didn't have any documents, I didn't have a purse, I didn't have any money. Somebody gave me a couple of zloty to get on a streetcar, and I simply hopped on a streetcar to get out of the district. And I went to somebody that knew, I knew that I can't go back to my family or anybody where I was known. So I went to a person that knew my family before the war. He was policeman. He was, of course, like all police during the war, hiding. And that I knew that he knew how to get me out of the district. He lived very close there. I just went a few stops by a streetcar to his house. It was a strange experience because he was helping my family trying to find out where I disappeared and find me. And when I knocked on his door and he opened the door and saw me, he almost fainted. There was an older gentleman and policeman and used to war and everything. I had to tell him to go and have a drink of water and calm down. He was convinced. He didn't want to upset my mother, but he was convinced that I was already executed, that there was no chance of getting me out. So when I walked in, he almost fainted.
And this is the time that your second husband reported you?
First.
First husband?
Yeah.
First husband reported you. How long did you stay in the city? You were beaten up. You got on a train or a trolley car.
I got to that policeman, retired policeman, and he got in touch with my family, got them out of the house because it was dangerous to talk on the phone, met them outside the house, told them that I am alive. And the question was, I couldn't go to any place where I was known. My mother's school friend from school, a girl she knew since she was, 10 years old, said, I will take her to my house. And she and her son said, we're waiting for her. And at the same time, somebody from the underground found out that I am out, and they wanted to talk to me. And that person, we got in a horse, dorożka, whatever you call it, and while we were going from that policeman to my mother's friend, he talked to me, and I had to tell him all about how I escaped and what I talked to and who in the Gestapo and if I knew any name, it's basically debriefing. You would call it debriefing. Then when we got there, we were still not finished. And it's one moment that I remember. Because I escaped about 20 odd hours before. And my dress was torn under the coat and the things. My dress was torn up and I was some blood on me and everything. And I wanted to wash. And when I first put my hand in water, it hurt terribly, because when I was escaping on the wall, I pulled myself on the wire with the barbed wire. And all those hours, I didn't feel pain. When I started relaxing in my mother's friend's house and got some water, started washing, I looked at my hands and I realized that it stings, it hurts, that I am in a lot of pain. That is what adrenaline and nerves can do to you. That was the one time that I realized how incredibly intense my fear and emotion when you fight for your life, how you think certain because I pulled myself on that wire. So, and then while I still couldn't eat. In spite of hours and hours I didn't eat, still couldn't swallow anything or eat. We finished the briefing, and then I don't really remember. At that point I was pretty groggy. I was very groggy. And I think they just left me alone, and I probably went to sleep. And then after that I could stay a short while, because it was always dangerous for people to have unexplained. You could explain, my cousin came to visit for 2 days, 3 days, but you were supposed to report to the police your whereabouts. So more than 2 days was dangerous. So then Dr. Riediger found for me a place to stay it was a villa in Warsaw, which was surrounded by a wall and inside was a garden, and very nice place. It belonged to friends of his, and he arranged with them for me to stay there till I got well. And I could sit in a garden, and I could live there, and nobody. It's the kind of a place that you have to ring a bell and a gatekeeper opens the thing and you go in. And everybody that went in and out had to go through that gatehouse. So I was there till I got better.
How many hours do you think it was from the time you escaped to the time you spoke to the man from the underground?
There is a gap, I have to think. There's a gap there where I was. I was in his house, and he offered me something to eat, and I couldn't eat. And I wanted him to let my mother know that I'm out. But he had to get mother out of the house because they suspected that there was somebody was listening in on the conversation. So that would be, what happened in the morning? From I got about 12 hours probably. All together, you know. Maybe more, maybe 14.
You couldn't eat. Was that because of the escaping or because of the beating?
Nerves. Nerve. It's just you operate on adrenaline, and in order to eat you have to relax.
Yes.
And going through such an experience, you cannot relax. I think if somebody gave me half a glass of scotch, in a few hours I would have eventually relaxed, or something else. But the tension is such incredible that you can't eat, you can't relax, you can't sleep. You have difficulties even talking.
Okay, one more question, and then I want to get back to that a little later. But I have written down here that, maybe I wrote it wrong, black and green uniforms?
Oh, the Germans?
I don't know.
Well, oh boy. There was so many that even I can't remember anymore, but you had the SS, the Gestapo, the Sonderdienst, the all kinds, police, Schutzpolizei, you know. The Germans have names for them and combination of organizations. And so basically you had political police and you had criminal police, and they worked together. And then they had the SS, the special, and then you had special battalions, which were not Germans. They were Latvians, they were Croatians. See the trouble you have now in Croatia and in Turkish people there in Yugoslavia. This is because the Yugoslav fought the Germans, and the Croats, part of it is the Croats were cooperating with the Germans. And they went to work in those black battalions. And there were, of course, Germans there too, but there were Volksdeutsche there. There were, I don't know what's, you name it, they had there. And those people were used by the Germans, really doing dirty work. They were executing people in ghettos, burning up in small towns, you know, in the eastern part of Poland especially. They were burning people alive. They would chase people together, sometimes in church, and burn them. And they were executing by machine guns, executing. Later on, they work and executed in gas chambers and everything. But in the beginning, before Himmler discovered that it's too slow just shooting and burning people, that it's a lot of manpower and not enough people get till they came to the mass production. They were the black battalions were basically, they were inside jails, inside concentration camps. They were used, brought by the Gestapo to places and surround, let's say, a small village and annihilate everybody. Yeah. It takes special people, you know, day in and day out to murder. Apparently it's not easy.
It was all different color uniforms.
Not all, because the Gestapo and the special battalions, which really, it's hard to say who was there. There were some even Russians and some, probably some even Poles maybe there.
Now, you said your first husband turned you in. Was he Jewish?
No.
No. Did he turn just you in, or you and your family?
Well, he basically went after me. But once he got going, he started turning everybody in.
What was his name?
Jerzy Rutkowski.
Spell it.
George, Jerzy is George, is J-E-R-Z-E-Y, I'm sorry, not R-Z-Y, and R-U-T-K-O-W-S-K-I. He's dead.
Did you ever see him after you got out after you escaped?
Yes, once.
And what was that like?
It was pretty gruesome because he tried to tell me that he didn't want to do it, what he did. Which he survived the war. At first he was, because the underground, he knew the underground was going to execute him. He had to hide. The way he was hiding was really not the easiest way. He volunteered for forced labor camp in Germany. So that's not the sweetest life. He went to a part of Germany which was very heavily bombed by the Allies. So he wasn't, but because he volunteered, he had a little better than the forced people that were there as prisoners, because he was there by, so he had a little better things. However, that covered him. He was hiding there. Nobody knew except, I think, his family where he was. Maybe even his family didn't know. But he was hiding. He couldn't hide in Poland. They would have dug him out. Then when the war ended, he had been still scared of being executed by somebody. So he was, I don't know where or how or what and what. But eventually he came out. And there were all kinds of amnesties run by the Russians, because Poland was occupied by the Russians. And eventually one of those amnesties covered him. The people in the Warsaw, especially because of the Russians did to Warsaw at the end of the war, the bombing, were pretty much gone. Most of them were dead anyway, after Warsaw Uprising. So after a while he came back, but he was, through the end of his life, he was scared. However, he came to England while I was in England. And I don't think I told anybody. But anyway, he found out where I was and asked me. He was on a ship, but he couldn't get off. He asked me to come, I think it was Southampton or someplace. He wanted to see me. But I decided that I'm going to do it. And he was trying to explain to me that he didn't want to do it, and, you know, it was all great mistakes and so on. And as I told you, as much as I wished that he was gone from the earth, you have to be born a killer to kill somebody in cold blood. You can't just do it. So my attitude was just go. I don't care what happens to you, just go. He was probably also wanted to know if I'm going to go after him. He was scared of that till the day he died. That shows you his mentality. Never occurred to him that he may want to do something, but I may not. So he was judging me by his own standard. He thought that I will go after him. It was just, I was waiting for the right moment or something.
Do you know if he informed on other people?
Yes.
Do you know who he informed on? The people you knew?
Yes. First of all, he informed about which the Gestapo was delighted to hear, because they never could get anything on my Danish uncle. They were delighted to hear that he was helping people to escape, and they were seventh heaven. But they just had his word. Now you have to prove it, because here they had a Danish citizen of a neutral country, so there was a problem there. But he informed on a lot of people that he knew about like people that worked for my father and were in hiding for one reason or another, or even people that worked in my uncle. They used to work for my father, but they now work for an aunt, and my uncle was helping a lot of people, giving them money and documents and places to work night. He informed on those people. He also informed of a man he knew that was in a Polish intelligence, and he knew him, and he didn't actually inform, but he promised the Gestapo in front of me that he will inform on him.
And a friend told you this information.
What?
How did you get this information?
Well, in front of me, he promised the Gestapo that he would inform on the man in the future.
So he was there when you were arrested?
Yeah.
So he knew they were coming?
Well, he brought them.
Well,
How did your mother stay out of jail?
I'm sorry, just lucky. No, she didn't, because, when in Denmark, when we got taken off the boat, she got in jail. She came out of jail. But that was then, as I told you, the Danish jail, to compare with the prisons in Poland, and the whole treatment was. But during the occupation, she was, first of all, she was staying most of the time with her sister and my Danish uncle, where they were protected through.
Where?
In Warsaw. In their apartment, which had a big Danish flag and a seal of Danish royal kingdom, that this is, for the Germans it was like an embassy. They couldn't go there. Then she, of course, after my uncle and my aunt and their son left for Denmark, she was hiding like everybody else, staying one place, not staying, moving around. She had very good papers. She had very good papers, because those papers were gotten in a following manner, that in a parish, Poles being mostly Catholic, your birth certificate was given by the parish when you were christened, when you were born, a few days after you were born. And that was the document you needed to obtain a passport, to obtain any other, to go to school. When you went to school, you brought a child, you brought birth certificate. The child would get registered. When you went to get a passport, you brought your birth certificate to prove that you're Polish citizen, you were born here.
Did it give a religion also?
No. The birth certificate, yes, because you were christened in a Catholic church. But Polish passports did not give religion. That was one of the, Poles were always painted as terribly anti-Semitic. Yet, there was no religion on Polish passports.
Very interesting.
That was, our constitution was, everybody was, the same. And the thing is that if you wanted to, you could live any place you wanted, you could do anything you wanted. People talk about ghettos in little towns or big towns. They didn't have to. They were happier together. Their language, their customs, their foods, their, it's like Mexicans here. It's like they don't have to. I mean, there is no law in America that tells a person to live in that district of town, but they're happier together. They feel better.
Were you in Warsaw during the ghetto uprising?
Yes.
Let me ask you, do you think there was a possibility of Warsaw being in full revolt during that uprising?
Oh, yes. That was touch and go. That was touch and go. But Britain simply was, and Allied were not able to provide military help to sustain. That would have been terrible massacre. As horrible as it was, it would have been, except it would have been taken probably center part of Poland, not only city of Warsaw. I mean, people were ready to go and, fight with their bare hands, very much. But it was basically from London and from, everybody was told to stay quiet and, not do anything. Because there simply was no way of doing it. The whole place was surrounded by this, I don't know how to compare it, thousands of tanks and heavy cannons and everything, and people without, with sticks. I mean, there was no way of doing anything but a total annihilations. And the Germans were there, they would have liked an excuse to level Warsaw, because Warsaw was torn in their heights from day one. They never Germans felt secure in Warsaw. It was the one city that, maybe somewhere in Yugoslavia too, but in Warsaw they walked together in groups with machine guns hanging over their arms, and not late at night. And that infuriated them, because they were the whole Europe was there. And it infuriated that it was the city where they were not safe. It was a city where the Gestapo chief would get shot while riding to work. It was a city where they used to, if the German soldiers got separated late in the evening, they would find his dead body, his uniform, his shoes, his papers, his gun, everything was gone. So they would have loved to have an excuse to totally annihilate Warsaw. Not that they really needed an excuse, but still, it would have been to be a major military operation. Because there was, after all, 1 million people close to it.
All right, now that we've gotten you rested in that house with the wall garden, what did you do after that?
Well, I stayed there for a while because I had a cracked skull and cracked jaw and knocked out teeth, and I needed help. And after I stayed there, like usual, somebody came to that gatehouse and started asking how many people there are and who lives there and are there some relatives visiting. So that is sign that you go. Every time somebody you don't know starts asking questions, you had to go. So it was decided that I will go to Kraków, which is a town in southeast Poland, where my cousin lived with her husband. And his name was Bora Dobija, and he was the son of the owner of the biggest newspaper in that city. He was the prince, you know, that, and in his house I was going to stay till the end of the war. Well, it didn't quite work that way because there was pressure even on his house. But I did find a place, rent single room in somebody's house that needed money desperately, and for a little money I could stay in that room till I went to Denmark illegally.
And nobody questioned the fact that there was a stranger in that house?
In his house for a while, no. But then even in his house, that's why I had to move out and rent a room.
And when you rented the room, did you have the same problem?
Oh no, because you prepared a story that you came to visit a relative, your old aunt or somebody is ill and you need to help her, and her house was, which was very normal during the war, you know, one room, small room. I couldn't stay with her, but I had to be with her in the daytime and her. You had a cover story, so to speak, while you were there.
When you worked, there was a time when you worked for, you said, a very demanding boss, when you smuggled papers.
Yes.
Was that a regular job, or was he in the underground?
No, that was in the underground.
He was in the underground.
He was in the underground.
So he knew what you were doing at night with the papers and having to come back.
He not only knew, he made me do it.
Were you paid for that? Were you paid for your
Well, we haven't given money to, when I went on a train, I was given money to eat. I didn't need money because my mother helped me and gave me money. If I didn't have any money to live, I would have gotten a minimum money to survive, to eat, so that I could devote my time. But you didn't get rich on it. You just barely survived. In my case, I was given money when I was actually doing things. But I had my own money, and most people that had their own money didn't get it. Only the people that had nothing to live on were giving a little money from the underground.
Could you give us his name?
Yeah, I don't know his real name.
Oh, could you give us the name you knew him as?
Yes, his name was Nowicki. Nowicki.
And do you know where he was from, or
Not
or
really.
do you have no
You know,
idea
this
where-
is the strange. This is the thing. You did not tell anybody anything unless they had to know. You didn't tell them, just like he didn't know my name. He knew the name that the papers I had on, which sometimes he prepared, you know, for me to travel on. He didn't know who I was. He suspected. things. Because of my speech, little bit background, occasionally something slips. You know, you say, so-and-so, Shaliapin was singing in an opera. Oh, I saw it. Well, those tickets were $60 each, cheap ones. So if you went to hear Shaliapin, that placed you in a certain position. You know, that made you... but he didn't know who I was, and I don't know who he was. And I don't know whether he survived or where he went, or I have a very strong suspicion, and I actually heard that from somebody, that before the war he worked for the intelligence service, the department that was keeping track of what goes in Germany, because he could speak German, in High German, Platt German, Low German, Middle, and several. His German was incredible. He also spoke some other languages. He could pass for a German, whatever he wanted to be, he could pass for. And I suspect that the story that he did work before the war, doing something quiet with Germany, that's likely story. Now, I shouldn't have heard it. Nobody should have told me that. It was a slip. I never mentioned it to anybody. I even tried not to think about it during the war. He was a terror. His favorite, when I complained that I had to travel all night on a train and then work all day, and I would say, I don't want to do something, I need to sleep, he would tell me very politely, you will sleep when you are in a grave. That was his standard answer. And I was very careful not to expose myself to that after a while. He also, I don't know for other people, but for me, the people that I was in a situation where we traveled, for example, as a married couple, I had no problems with the person I traveled with making a pass. Anything but what Polish people consider that if you don't ask a girl, you're insulting her. You know, they think that it's expected. So if she's reasonably pretty, you tell her that you would like to. And he would tell me that it's such a waste of time. We're here in a hotel together, why don't we do something? And I will say, no, let's play cards. We played cards. He was very nice about it, but he did ask. So my pride was saved. I was asked, and he didn't press.
About how old was he? He was older than you are.
Older. I would say he was maybe even 20 years older than I was. He didn't look it, but he was, you know, I was 20 and he was probably 40. Very handsome man.
Did you see him after the war? Did you ever?
I don't have the faintest idea. Once I left that group, you know, once you left something, then you never, and you didn't ask. You didn't want to know, because if you were caught and tortured, the less you knew, the less you could tell. And eventually, really, you couldn't count on not telling considering what the Germans could do to you. I mean, you couldn't count on it. So the less you knew, the better it was.
You want to take
Asks.
Okay.
I have at home photograph. You remember that story I told you about those two Polish officers? What is the last thing you said?
Yeah.
I found picture of them.
Okay. You said that you worked in a camouflage factory.
Yeah,
Why did you leave that factory?
because I had to disappear. First, they had to remove me from the factory because there was some talk the minute something like that starts, you go, you don't wait. Well, Colonel Babicki, who was the owner and who knew that I was hiding there, transferred me from the factory to his home office, to his strictly office, and I worked there for a while because he knew that it wasn't safe for me to stay in the factory. Somebody got suspicious, maybe even I slipped, and I said something inadvertently that wasn't quite with my whole life's, you had a made-up story. For example, when you have false papers, you cannot produce mama and papa. So you're an orphan. Maybe you slipped. You don't admit to brothers or sisters because when Gestapo gets you, they will want to know where they are. Whether they are real or imaginary, they will.
Yeah.
So you always were the only child. You had no relatives, no parents dead, It was the only safe way to go. Maybe you slipped. Or people just got suspicious. So the minute there was any whiff of too many questions, you go, whether it was a place you were working or living or renting or staying or whatever.
All right, you also said that you had a suitcase with dynamite. Where did you get it?
From the underground. From the underground. You see, when people had places, let's say I am what you call it, the mechanic, the person that goes to put the bomb. This is a great risk. Now, you don't put that person who is very skilled in a risk of having the stuff with you. So what usually happened is, okay, let's say we have to dynamite this room. So the mechanic arrives here who is going to do it, the person that knows how to put the explosives together. Somebody else will bring the explosive. Somebody else will carry whatever is cut off, left over, which could give away and dispose of it.
Not the person who brought it, somebody
Not the person who brought it. Sometimes there will be even two people, two hands before it gets there. Let's say I had to take whatever I had in my suitcase to you, and you will take it to him. And he will be the one that will hand it to the guy that will actually do it. This way, the backtracking, if somebody spotted something, was practically impossible. Because let's say somebody spotted you handing somebody something. Well, they didn't know where from, where you went, what you did. And you met her and 15 other people. So one of the 15, that is too difficult to trace. If it was just one person, then somebody could follow you.
To change the subject a little bit, I wanted to ask you about your children. You haven't mentioned yet in the interview about your children. You could tell us a little bit about them and their names. And also you mentioned to me about how you wanted to speak about their comment to you that you were very hard and why you were hard.
You know, this is something that is still a problem to me. When you have to survive wars, and each of us has had some time in their life that they had some great adversity, and to get over it, you had to pull your resources, your inner resources, and say, okay, this is not time to get upset, hysterical, sorry for myself. This is the time that I have to be there and produce and do things and take control. When you do that, you learn a certain discipline. And you learn to pull yourself together. Instead of sitting down and crying, you maybe kick something and swear and you go and do it. And when you develop that, in everyday life, with people that didn't go through it, you forget. You do it instinctively, mechanically, you don't think about it. Instead of crying, you control yourself and maybe you walk outside. Instead of getting upset or scared, you swear and you stand your ground. And that is such a mechanical, it's acquired, but it's part of you. For people that had normal life, that didn't have the very bad experiences, has a chilling effect. And the control, also occasionally it works the other way around. I remember in a nursery school, of all places, children were killing little animals and things. I lost my temper. Oh, nursery child, why do you kill it? Why do you torture it? You know, I got angry. And I know that the whole nursery was discussing my anger. That was abnormal reaction. Any kind of pain and torture, even on worms and on bugs and on guinea pigs, you know, I couldn't tolerate. And so my children had to live with that. In one way, I would get very angry about things that nobody else would get angry about. On the other way, when they expected me to burst out crying, I was cold as a piece of ice and didn't react at all. And that's why they call me hard. I don't know if I explained it well. I'm trying.
Could you give us their names?
Okay, my older daughter is, diminutive is Krysia, but she's Kristina Anna Maria. Then my younger daughter is Joanna Maria Teresa.
Yolanda?
Joanna.
Spell that.
Joanna. Joanna. Joanna, like Johanna or whatever. And Mark is Mark Dean Anthony. And Mark wanted to be, my brother wanted to be a godfather, and I guess he probably wanted to be called Mark, have a second name, his name. But we couldn't face Mark Anthony, so we put Dean in between there. Because it was just, Mark Anthony just didn't work for us.
Also, I want to talk to you about reparations, and I wanted you to discuss the letter that you wrote that you told me about.
Yeah.
And how you were approached and something about that.
I was approached, probably it started when I went out of prison in Denmark. The Danish ministry called in people and said that we, for sitting in jail and everything, that we are entitled to reparation. I after the war, I really, you have no idea how I didn't want to discuss it, think about it, have anything to do with it. Anything that, it was just, I couldn't. So I just thank you very much. I manage my own way, no. And then a few years later, there was more and more things in the papers about the Germans to pay people. And my mother, who had not only was talking about the reparation for being in jail, but she was talking about the reparation of confiscating the house, the art, the antiques, the factories, the money, all of that. Money that she even lost, the diamond in the last days of war, plus her health and everything. She had a lot to started investigating how much she could recover. Well, it wasn't very simple and it was very long. And she said that I should write an application. And she sent me some papers. And in those papers, German with their regular, typically German, had it very well organized. For killed parents so much, for killed mothers so much, for killed both parents so much, for losing your 2 legs so much, for losing hands and legs so much, for per day in concentration camp so much, for everything was, it was very complete list. And I took one look at it and I just, excuse me, go to hell, where you belong, where you should have been, and where you should stay, as far as I'm concerned. I didn't want any part of it. But my mother told me that I should write. And I wrote that there was an attorney in Switzerland, I don't remember his name, and I wrote him 200 pages, while the Germans cannot, because paying me for beating or for so much per diem in jail, they ruined my life. I was supposed to go to college. I would have come after the war with a college education. I would have come unscarred, healthy, without all the things that happened to me. And they're not paying for it. The lists don't cover that. So they can keep their money and I will keep my attitudes toward Germans. And that was, I wrote that man that. And I never heard from him, but my mother told me later, I think when I was in Denmark, that he was very impressed by that letter.
Did your mother get any reparations?
No,
Nothing.
because there were still Russians there. You know, the Poles that now in Free Poland, I know people that got their homes back, but I will give you what you get back. The person I'm talking to is Prince Tarnowski. He had a huge estate and fields and forests and waters with fish and, you know, horses. And the estate supported a huge house with servants and style of living like a prince should. During the occupation and after, when the Russians were, that estate got cut up into little few acres things, and people built their little mud houses there and settled, started raising potatoes or something. When he went, after the Russian got chased out of Poland, he went and sued for his estate back. He got his house, which was damaged, ransacked, burned. There was not a piece of silver left. He ended up buying an old damaged portrait that some peasant had in a stable for a lot of money. But he just got the house and the garden around it. The estate is cut up and cannot be retrieved. So, if he didn't have an extremely, his mother, very rich lady living in Paris, she inherited a fortune, her jewelry, and a lot of money from her because she was a relative to the British royal family. And she stayed wealthy, living in England and later on in France. If he didn't inherit the money after his mother and used it to repair the house, to live in it, and trying to furnish it, and mainly repair it and just live there. And he can afford, because he inherited fortune. If he didn't, he couldn't even afford to live there. So getting back those estates from the new government that is there, also they recognize that yes, it was yours, it was confiscated by the Germans, yet you should get it back. But you don't get the whole thing. That's gone. This is not retrievable anymore. All you get is the house, and if you can afford it, then you can live it. He does. He lives there. Somebody told me that he actually got a lot of stuff back, and it's beautiful. But it's just a huge house with a garden. Everything that supported it is gone forever. So the reparations are not that simple. When my mother died before the Russians got out, as long as the Russians were there were no reparations for anybody.
Did you, the people who first got you into the underground, the Burgers?
Bergers, yeah.
Did you see any of them after the war?
No. I don't know what happened, whether they survived. I really don't know. He had a wife that was, I don't know if he was divorced. but he was definitely separated from her. However, during the German occupation, they did think in their underground together. And he had a son. But what happened, whether they survive even, I don't know. I have no idea. You can trace most of I will like to read at the end of my story names of my people in the underground. Ludwig Berger, who's sworn me in, then the 4 people that I work with and so on.
Do you have that list with you here?
No, not today. But I had it last time. But they are, very few survived. And maybe they survived after the war. Maybe they're not alive anymore. But many things, you just don't know what happened to them. And there is really no way of tracing. Or sometimes you had one of my brother's friends, I was told a story about how he died, and I don't believe it. Simply the Russians shot him. They say that he committed suicide. No way. No way. That man would not have left his old mother, alone and helpless and committed suicide. She lost hands.
Oh, really?
And he was supposedly got so upset that he shot himself. No way. So the Russians shot him.
Tell me, I missed the last interview, so I may be repeating myself. If I am, just say so. Would you tell us some of the things you did in the underground?
Well, at different times there were different things. It started with taking messages from one place to another. Then I was asked to help in an execution of a Polish film actor, and I couldn't do it. It was just after the war started, and there were not enough people murdered, and the whole thing didn't crystallize to the fight for life and death. And I knew that person, and that person was very friendly to me, and I found it just inconceivable that I should make him open the door so he can be shot. Because they knew that he would open the door for me. And maybe if it came a little later, or whoever talked to me would have explained to me more. Because as usual in the underground, they tell you, we're going to shoot him, they don't you why and who and what, you know. You need only to know that your job is to make him open the door. Why and everything you don't know. So maybe it was differently put to me, or it was a few months later when I started seeing what was going around me. And I would have done it, but I chickened out. I just chickened out. Couldn't do it. It's not easy to kill a person if you're not born to it. Your nature allows you to do it. And then there were basically helping, transporting. Then they caught on to the fact that because of my Danish uncle and some of the Swedish people that were coming from Sweden and some of the Switzerland people, I had way of getting things out of Poland because I knew the people that will do it. So they switched me to more of transport, intelligence, different things. And then by one thing kind of leads to another. Once you got in it, then they discovered that I could speak well enough German to pass for a German. So I landed with my very demanding boss traveling as a German with him. And then the group was compromised, so you got switched again, and then I was totally out of it because of my Gestapo, and then I had to leave Warsaw. Then I started again in Krakow with another group, with another people. So it kept on changing. During the stay in Warsaw, I had one stint of helping with the false paper. And then that group had to hide. So, again, once there is a bad smell, or somebody gets caught, one or another, somebody gets caught, then you disband, you disperse, you reorganize. So then the same thing happened in Krakow. I was helping somebody with their work, and they got chased. So I had to hide, and I had to get a new contact. And you always lose, once you lose the contact, that's it. Because if you don't, then the Gestapo has a very simple way of getting back to.
In Krakow, you mentioned the Archbishop Sapieha, was it? That he stood up to the Germans. Did he have contact with the underground?
I'm sure he did, but on a level that was way beyond me. I imagine they did inform him or did ask him, but on a level that would be probably on a level of the general who commanded the whole underground, if he did communicate with him. And how they did it, because the Germans were watching him incredibly.
Yeah, you said that he stood up to the Germans a lot.
Well,
Do you
he
remember what
did.
issues that he's...
On many issues. He, he went to the governor. Poland was wiped. There was no Poland. We had a gubernator, the general gubernator, whose name was Frank. And he was running Poland became a province of Germany, run by this person, Frank. And he was making decisions about church, about forcing people to labor, about not Gestapo. Gestapo worked with him and actually influenced him, but he was basically the gubernator of. It was supposedly mean that the Germans are civilized and have a civilian running very benign province of Germany in a very benign way. You can translate it any way you wish. But he was very, I forgot what was the issue. They were going to arrest it's funny, I don't remember. But anyway, there was some issue where he went to speak to Frank. And Frank wouldn't see him because he didn't want to give in, and he had no way of doing it. You know, Poland being a mostly Catholic country, the Germans didn't want to push too hard church because it could mean trouble, you know, uprisings, shootings, which will interrupt sending of weapons to the East Front, which they couldn't afford, so they were trying not to push church. And Frank went to interview, to talk and ask for not putting priests in jail or whatever it was. I forgot what the issue was. Anyway, Frank wouldn't see him. So he said, I will wait. He was an old man, and he just sat in the waiting room. He didn't eat, he didn't drink, he just sat and waited. Frank got upset because if he died there, he knew there would be hell to pay. I mean, you know, Polish peasants don't get upset easy, but the head of the Catholic Church, he would have workmen and peasants and everybody.
So he sat there and wouldn't eat, he was on
He just, you know, he sat to wait to see Frank, and Frank wouldn't see him. So he sat.
Stay there. Do you know how long he sat there?
A few days. Frank finally got to see him. He outsat him because Frank could not afford him have him die in his waiting room. And he couldn't throw him out. You know, this was, after all, the Wawel Palace in Kraków, and there were Swiss newspapermen and there were foreign, you know, that was, at that time, Warsaw as a capital of Poland didn't exist. They made capital of Poland Kraków, with Frank sitting in the royal palace being the boss. And so, of course, all the international newspaper, including neutral countries, were there. So if he died, or if they tried to throw him out, it would have gotten all over the world. He couldn't do it. So he finally had to give in and see him. Just one old man sat straight, sat there. Very old man, not very well. But you see, Sapieha was, as an Archbishop of Poland, he has a rank of Prince of the Church. He's to be treated at royal palaces, at ceremonies in Rome as a prince. But Sapieha was born prince, so he was very easy in his role.
You told us a story about a young boy or a teenage boy that took the blame for a gun on the trolley.
Yes.
Which was an incredible act of individual
Incredible.
bravery. Do you know any other stories of individual bravery like that?
So many that is difficult, you know. They may be not as big and as public, but they are. They are. Little boys saving people or children. The unbelievable thing is that after a couple of years of war, all children were old. They had an understanding beyond age or their brain. They sense their parents' fear and to be quiet when they were hiding, to be quiet, not to make any noise, not to cry, not to react. Trying to think of specific. Well, one was when you went at one point going through ghetto, there was streetcars from one end of Warsaw to another, which were actually going through ghetto. In order that there was no traffic, black market or smuggling or people escaping or going into ghetto, when the streetcar got to the border of the ghetto, German police, Schutzpolizei, that is military police or just ordinary police, and Polish policemen actually were forced to do it. So there would be 2 or 3 people on each end of the streetcar. The streetcar would be closed, and they went through ghetto. So you couldn't get off or in or put anything on the streetcar. And then when you came on the other end, they get off, and the streetcar going the other way. Again, you had those armed people seeing to it that nobody got in. Sounds like a ridiculous arrangement, but nevertheless, there were things that were more ridiculous. And a little boy was smuggling food. He was probably 10, 12 years old, but looked like all starving children, looked smaller and younger. And the Germans found the package that he was smuggling. And basically what grown-up men did, everybody will say, it's not mine, you know. Germans will confiscate it, they will beat up a few people, and they were extremely angry. They will sometimes grab some people, but most of the time, and since everybody's saying, I don't know who it is. However, they were extremely angry, and they were threatening that they're going to shoot women and children, and started separating people. Said every so long, if you don't admit who did it, we shot 5 or 10 people. So the boy came out and said, "Miss mine." He admitted it was his. And the Germans said, "What is inside?" And he told them, and they opened it, and they took him, probably shot him. Nobody knows what. But he definitely knew what's going to happen to him. So you cannot say that even a 12-year-old child didn't know. He knew.
He was trying to smuggle food into the ghetto?
Yes.
So how would he have gotten it off the trolley? Throwing it out a window?
He had somebody at some place waiting and threw it off there. He didn't physically get off it, he just threw it off. Cigarettes, food, medicines, whatever.
Do you think this could ever happen again?
I hope not. However, I'm not making any guarantees. If you look even at some political discussion in this country, in elections, some of the far left and far right, it's very frightening. For a person like me, it's very frightening. there comes a point when you start wondering, just like these neo-Germans, neo-Nazis. It's very, very uncomfortable feeling. You hope not. You think that people learned. But then you look at Yugoslavia, then you look at some African countries, then you look at some South American countries, and you start getting a very queasy feeling. How can I be sure? Could a Hitler happened? Maybe. It would have to be but we went through hysterias. We went through McCarthy, and I'm sorry, some people will get maybe very upset with me, but Billy Graham and other people get very fantastic about it. And I don't care which side of the place you are, whether you too religious or you hate religion, too much left or too much right. If you get through a certain point, yes, it could happen. Now, whether in some countries easier than others. Some countries are more militant, more, I would say, rabid. But some countries, in America, I don't know. I certainly hope not. I think that people are more like my husband, more like my son, more like people I am friends with that wouldn't allow it to happen. I hope that education, tolerance is stronger than mass hysteria like we have seen Leni Riefenstahl films. On the other hand, strangely enough, the subtitle of the story about the total Eichmann in Jerusalem, the subtitle is the most frightening thing, is the banality of evil. And this is, the banality of evil is that woman knew what she was talking about. That such ordinary people can do such horrible things. I hope it's only in Germany, but it's very frightening. People can be, and you have to think that when times are good, we have students screaming and we have people, but when things are really bad and it's me or him and I'm hungry and to survive, I have to step on you to survive, and it could happen.
Tell me, your children stated that you are tough. How else have they reacted to your experience?
They claim that I was a very hard mother to live with, that I demanded too much of them, that I was... There are certain things that maybe if I was more open, they would have understood, but they were too young. I couldn't explain it. I had a tremendous fear of two very pretty girls getting raped, for obvious reasons. And therefore I put certain restriction where they went with hooting and what. Well, eventually, the word today, when they are in their 40s, came to the same place that it's not safe for women to go alone and do certain things. But I did it 30 years ago. And at that time, teenage girl went to movies and came late and unsupervised and unchaperoned, and I was scared of it, and I was not allowing them do things that they claimed their friends were allowed to do. And I couldn't explain it to them, because on one way, you want your children to be safe. On the other way, you don't want your child to live in the world that I lived, of evil, of meanness, of danger, of nasty things. You know, they cannot live their life being scared to get after a movie on a bus because their mother is scared. And so there was two forces pulling on me, and I think it affected them very much so. And they think on one way that I was too strict. On the other way, I told them that they had to make their own decisions and that I expected them certain maturity and certain responsibility out of them.
Do they have children of their own?
No. None of my children. This is the strangest thing, that out of a very big group of people I was, during the war, my school friends, in the underground, I'm the only one with children. And many made it was a choice. It was a conscious choice. They decided the world is not a place to have children. My children, to a certain degree, blame me for it. That I was too critical, too pessimistic. I didn't think so. But obviously that's what communicates. I was different. There's no way I was different than some of their friends' mothers. Their mothers were cozy, making cookies, you know, and I don't know. I was just different, and I didn't realize it. This is now that I am in my 70s and looking back on it, I realized that I was a different mother. But when I was 30, I didn't. I said I was an average American mother with a touch of foreign flavor, like many other Americans, second or first generation. I didn't realize, I didn't know. Apparently I was very much different, created problem for them.
Do they still feel that you were too harsh on them?
Yes.
They still feel that way?
Yes. Especially my oldest daughter. My younger daughter announced that, yes, I was a terrible mother, but she came to terms with it. But my older daughter is unable to get over it. She had a horrible life. She was mistreated, maltreated. She's carrying the I think the burden of the horrible warriors and the hiding and the looking at cruelty and that it has bearing on them. They carry that second hand. It's not free, you know. You don't get scot-free from it. Your mother communicates and willingly or unwillingly, consciously and unconsciously. Would I do things different? Yes. I would have, although I did consult a friend of mine who was a psychologist and wrote many works about child development, I would have gotten more into it to get myself rid of my anxieties and my problems, to communicate it less to my children. But that is, again, 40 years ago. Can't step back. Yes, they are paying for it.
Are there things that you haven't told us that we have missed? You can start with A.
Probably. But there are stories that, you know, happened during the war. There were friends that I knew and either had terrible experience with or very good experience with. There were probably stories, but I don't know which ones have bearing on the whole story of the Holocaust.
They all have bearing. They all affected you, one way or the other.
Yeah, but the thing is that, you know, summarized even in 5, 10, 15, 20 hours, 5 years of constant incidents, of constant confrontations, of constant running. They were long 5 years. The fact that I had terrible time each night finding a place for a while to stay. I didn't know where I'm going to sleep, or if I'm going to have a place. And if I can't find a place to sleep, you couldn't stay on a sleep because there was curfew. So where am I going to hide? You hide in a building on a staircase. If the janitor finds you, who knows? He may call police, or he may demand money, or he may say, go on a roof and hide with the, you know, on the attic or in the cellar. Guy could be a savior, or you're dead. And you know, that wasn't one night. It wasn't even 1 year. It was on and off all the time. Suddenly something went wrong and you had no place to stay. And the people, there is a limit how much you can ask people, because the person you ask lists their own life, their children's, their parents, their brothers, their neighbors. You know, if the Germans got swinging, they shot everybody in the building. They felt like it. So asking people for things was, yes, you ask, but you couldn't say, I blame you, when they couldn't give you. Or they said no because we have a terrible janitor and he sticks his nose into everything and he will report me. By tomorrow I will be reported. That was it. And you cannot blame people for being scared. I mean, some people did. Some people have a constant grudge that whatever people did for them wasn't enough. They could have shared more, they could have given more, they could have hidden them. They could have... A typical example is the terrible grudge they had with the Polish priest's house in Krakow, that they wouldn't allow illegal people to stay there. They couldn't, because if the Germans were just waiting for something like that, one person and every priest in that whole building, and the whole head of the church, which was very anti-German and was holding the poor population and educated together, would have been destroyed. And people still say, yeah, they could have done more. Maybe. I don't think so.
Has there been a time where you, at least a day, with all this, that you could look back and say, that was a pleasant day?
Not fully. I remember one day when I just had enough, and instead of going someplace, I managed to get I think of all things, is a slice of bread, dry bread, but nevertheless bread and an onion. And I went to Vistula, the river that goes through Warsaw, and sat all day in the sun, doing absolutely nothing. It cost you 50 cents or $1 to pay for an entry on a beach, and you sat there, and I didn't know. I just sat in the sun. But you saw Germans pushing people around, because when they got there and they wanted to have a boat, they pushed people out of the way and got the boat, whether they were in line or not. One piece of bread for a whole day in the fresh air, it's really not enough food, so you still are hungry. I couldn't afford the streetcar in the entrance, so I had to walk a few miles to the river and back from the river. It was, after all day in the sun, it was a long walk back. That was about... Now the other way was that I talked about it before. There is a limit how much pressure you can take. And since you were not free to drink and be silly, drinking is a release. That's why everybody drank during and right after the war. Whole Europe was drunk after the war. Sometimes a group of people that could be free, when the curfew came, will meet in some place, some reasonable, safe place, and everybody would bring something. A little vodka, a piece of bread, whatever you could get your hands on. And we just get drunk, get silly. And because there were usually people that worked together, then there wasn't any fear of spilling secrets. And we sometimes played very childish games. I mean, really childish games. It was a form of releasing the pressure. Being young for a few hours after curfew with few friends. But you see, we couldn't do it without alcohol. The alcohol lowered the inhibitions, and we were able to be silly and joke and do stupid things. And there were few hours stolen here and there. Unfortunately, I was in love. Unfortunately, being in love was no release whatsoever, because the minute you were concerned about somebody, that person's safety or danger or life or possibility of being caught and taken to a concentration camp or something became burden, if anything, it was a burden, not a release.
Sean, do you have a question?
Yeah, and I wasn't in the 3 previous interviews we've done with you, so I don't know if this has already been covered. But have you been back to Poland? Or
3 times.
What were those visits like?
Well, unfortunately, the visits were when the Russians were still in Poland. I never been in Poland after the Russians were chased out of there. So they were mixed blessing. However, they had a tremendous emotional impact on me. My husband insisted that I go back. He told me that I will never feel that I belong in America and that this is my home till I go back and I realize that I'm now here, that this is where I live, and this is, which I should have known because I spent here so many years and I had children here and they grew up with me and I grew up, and also being married to my husband. But he was right. Going to Poland, I realized how much I like Poland, how much I enjoyed seeing my friends, but I realized that home was here with my family and with my husband. As far as my reactions to people, what was wonderful when I went back to Europe, both to Denmark and Poland, that after initial greetings, after 18, 20 years or more, it was, the time didn't exist. I was with really good friends. That's the amazing part. With the very good friends, I was right there and I could ask questions, which you can only ask good friends. And I got answers which are only given to good friends. So emotionally, it was very great. Each trip was different because I went with so different people and so different. One of my trips was, the very end of it was interrupted by, it was one of the anti-Russian bombarding of trains, and I was on that, not on that train, but couldn't get from Warsaw to Gdańsk to get out of Poland because the trucks were destroyed by Solidarity bombarding. Emotionally, it was a tremendous experience.
Did you seek any of your friends out when you went back? Did you?
Oh, yes. I saw my school friends. I saw some friends from the underground. Actually, one of my most pleasant experiences was my teacher of physical education from high school. She was, actually I didn't realize it, I just met some school friends and they said that Mrs. Maria Malinowska, you know, she sees a lot of the girls go and visit her. And Mrs. Malinowska was apparently one of the biggest heroes in the underground during the war. She and her friend, who was a woman parachutist and a woman flyer, a very famous one, were traveling and parachuting and in the underground and in England and back in Poland, and they were organizing everything, and they had all kinds of medals and were very famous. I didn't realize that. When I went there, I was received as an old student and very nicely by her, and she was very happy to see me. And actually a whole group of friends from the same school came, and they were all very curious and made me tell how I got out of Poland and where I live, and I had with me pictures of my children and how I live in America, and they were very interested. But I didn't realize how famous she was. My brother used to go to Europe and Poland and Russia because of his science often. And when he went, I sent him to see her. I wanted him to go greet her, take something for her, and talk to her. The communication by mail was very difficult and was supervised. And when my brother went there, he was received by the government as a guest, and was as a guest at the joint session of the parliament. And he said, I have to go and see this friend of my sister, her teacher from school. And the man who was from the government, taking him around, said, you're going to see her? Can I go with you? So my brother said, yeah, that's my sister's teacher from school, and I have a message for her, and I promised my sister I go. Please take him. And she says, you don't know how famous those two women are. They are great. I'm so anxious to meet them. So my brother took him, and the guy was absolutely delighted and speechless. But if not for that incident, I would have, they never told me that there were those great heroes and they were famous and they had, you know, all kinds of medals, and they were just my old teacher and her friend.
Did any of your Jewish friends survive that you know of?
Yes. One is amazing. His name is Edmund Polak. He was with me. I knew him from before the war. And he was not only survived, but he met a woman in, I don't know whether it's Auschwitz or Buchenwald or where, one of those. In the concentration camp, he met a woman, and they both survived. They got out of the concentration camp, and they married. And he was a small, not, you know, some of my friends that were huge and healthy and sportsmen and didn't make it. but he was small and not very strong, yet he survived. And he was, I think, 3 or 4 years in a concentration camp. And his wife was shorter time there, and he actually was helping her a little bit. And they both survived, got out and got married. So there were some extreme cases of things. Some of my cousins, of course, and I'm trying to think other. There was one person that I'm pretty sure that he was Jewish, but he would never admit it or talk about it, which is natural. I mean, that's the way it was supposed to be. And he survived. As a matter of fact, he not only survived war, but after the war he managed illegally to get out of Russian-occupied Poland and went to Sweden. And whether he stayed in Sweden or went further to Canada or America or Australia, I don't know. But I know about a trace of him through the Danish kind of underground railway that got him during the Russian occupation through Denmark to Sweden, and that he survived.
Why was your brother a guest of the government?
Because my brother is a very famous scientist, and he is they actually gave him, you know, when he was, very recently was his 80th birthday, and he had a wonderful time. First he was invited to Albert Hall, where he got a medal for his scientific things from the Queen. Then he went to France, where he gets something from the university there, an honorary. He gets honorary chairs everywhere. And then he went to Poland, where he got an honorary professorship chair and a medal. And they were treating him as, you know, when he arrived, the University of Warsaw dean was there, the Warsaw Polytechnic dean was there, they all came with things. He's, you know, they're very proud of him. Except now his colleagues from university, it's very embarrassing because the people that survive all this mess, the fellow professors in Warsaw, they are in their 30s or 40s. My brother is 7, so it's kind of, you know, they get medals from guys that are half his age or less.
Were you ever recognized, or any of your colleagues recognized for the work you did in the underground?
Yeah, in London, I guess, right after the war, but I got as much recognized as teased, you know, because I was called the well-known Polish peasant party activist, and you know, I am about as peasant activist as you know, I don't know what they were. I got the men that were. Yes, I did. Some people in the government and the things, but they were also. Some were very annoyed with me because they were 20, 30 years older, and they had positions, and they found themselves in a situation that they had to ask me for a favor. And that didn't do me any good whatsoever. Like Major No and the other officers, when they found themselves in a situation that I could get concession and help, they couldn't. They had to take it, but they didn't like it. And they occasionally did little spiteful things to get even, so to speak, get their frustration out on me. So it didn't always work as a medal, it worked sometimes against me. I had some recognitions in London, some of it. Not as much in America, because by the time I came to America, I wanted to forget all of it, just leave me alone. The Danes did to a certain degree. Somebody in Sweden, once in a while, something key. But my attitude, leave me alone, it's gone, I don't want any part of it. Very few times I enjoyed meeting somebody from some kind of, you see, the people I really would like to have, I was separated because they were in Poland or someplace else, and I was in America. So communication was very difficult. The other people, I didn't care. The one time when I went to Poland and I met them, and it was a great experience.
Tell me, how has these interviews affected you?
That remains to be seen to a certain degree. They are upsetting because, for better or for worse, whether that was the right decision or not, whether it did me any good or not, whether it helped my children or not, for years I didn't want to talk about it. And I had many of the things you heard here, my mother, my brother, not even Dean never heard. I just couldn't. I didn't want to live the black time forever, to be caught like a fly in amber, suspended in that. And believe me, I know people that are. I know Polish people that whenever I went to their house, for years after the war, all the talk was fight in the underground. They were days of glory to a certain degree, because they were very young. We all live at great speed and full of adrenaline and great, there were no grays, they were black and white. You lived at the top of your ability. You have a feeling of being heroic. Very exciting days. I mean, after running around and doing all those things, sitting down and making pickles and mending, your clothes, it's very great living. But I had it with this great heroic times, and I just wanted to be ordinary person with family, with children, with pets, with whatever that life brought. How well I succeeded, I don't know. If you judge by what my two daughters say, terrible. F minus.
What's your son say?
He doesn't talk. To get my son to talk is very difficult. Also, I have a problem. I cannot get to him and he cannot get to me because I don't drive anymore, and I have asked people to take me there. And when I come with somebody, then of course we can't talk. He is disabled, he cannot come to me, he doesn't have a car. He also has struggled with his being disabled, his life. He also is a clown. He keeps things. If my daughters think that I keep my private life private, that's nothing to compare with my son. He has it 10 times more than I do. And I cannot really blame him. You know, I cannot say that's terrible what you're doing, because maybe he learned it from me. He's very intelligent. He's a very nice person. Whether he's a happy person, I don't know. He was interested in a lady and somehow didn't work out for him. And I don't see any great interest, any great love again in his life. Maybe it will come, maybe it won't. He's very independent, and when I start telling him, you know, your health or something, he was a boy, little boy, he had one answer. He would say, let me worry about it. It wasn't rude, it wasn't, you know, when I say, did you do your homework or something? Let me worry about it. And he today, it's the same thing. He doesn't even say it because he's polite. He doesn't want to be unkind. But communicating with him is not easy. I think he's a very wonderful person. But unfortunately, things happen to him that he doesn't wish to talk about it. And he always was like that. Even in a little child in a nursery school or in grammar school, he had that little bubble of air, invisible, around him, and people just left him alone. He always had it. On the other side, I was told by my daughter who observed him in school that he very rarely said something. But when he decided to express an opinion, make a statement, the other children quit doing what they were doing and they were listening. He was very much respected by his peers. And people have to accept him on his terms.
Was he born disabled?
No, he paid for his reckless kindness. As far as I know, one of the things that happened to him, how he damaged his spine, to the best I can piece it together, he worked, and they had big files full of documents to take out of the building. And there was a staircase, and they were taking bits by bits, bit by bit, and Mark, being young and rash and a hero, said, oh, let's just take the whole thing downstairs. And he fell, and the file fell on him. And Mark is not a person to run to a doctor, so his back hurt, so he went and slept on the floor for 2 or 3 days, drugged himself, afterwards took pain medicine and went to work. And then he had another incident, and again the same thing. You know, when his back got better, he went back to work. And then the third incident, he phoned my younger daughter, and he said he can't walk. So she had to go in the middle of the night. My younger daughter has the curse of being the person that if somebody is in trouble, they call her. She's the one that's taking care of me, and when Mark needed to get to hospital, he called her, and she somehow got him to hospital. And x-rayed his back, and I talked to him. It's totally, I will never say anything. He was told that they could operate, they don't know exactly what's wrong. They could operate on his spine, but there is 50% chance that he will be well, but the other 50% is if the operation doesn't work, that he's in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. With that kind of odds, I won't make any comment. It's his decision. He's 30-odd years old, and he has his own decision. Nobody has a right to advise, influence, even make comments. It's between him and his doctors and his decision.
Do your children want to view the tapes, your interviews? Have they expressed any?
Yes, my younger daughter already did. My older daughter was supposed to see me today. She is visiting from Rhode Island. And when I said that today, I don't know what time, and she says, oh no, that's very important, you have to do it. She's very curious. They both ask me how I feel about the tapes, and I like the reaction. My son, I haven't talked about it yet, but they both ask me about it. And I said, as long as I am alive, I prefer that people, I don't like people to hear intimate things about. There were things I never told anybody. I don't want people to hear about it. So, till I die, I said, don't. But when I die or I'm not conscious anymore, you're free to do this, up to you. The tapes are yours, you can do whatever you want with them. And they said they will. They both said yes. The question came because somebody wanted to copy the tapes, and the circumstance, somebody, maybe it was different, but the circumstances were such that I decided that I do not wish to be subject of discussion, conversation, comments, everything. Anyway, it was hard for me to do because I didn't for years talk about it. And I was forced by this incident to think about it. I didn't think about it when I made those tapes. But then I thought about it and I thought, well, what's the point of making the tapes? Yes, they can go and listen to them, but that's one thing. That's fine. Somebody goes and listens to them, they're welcome to it. But copying it, using it, that's another story. As far as my daughter and my son, and probably my brother, for example, I don't know how I feel about my brother listening to them while I'm still alive. But afterwards, free for all, you're all welcome. I don't know, I'm afraid that change my attitude. I'm not worried about their attitude. It's my feeling of discomfort that matters to me. I never was comfortable with airing my good or bad years. It was years of great misery. I felt not worth much. I felt like, one of my friends from school, one of the people that I met in Warsaw when I went after the war, she said, I watched you during the occupation and you seemed to me like a homeless dog. And I said, Adela, that's exactly how I felt. I was. I didn't belong to anybody. I didn't have to. I said, I didn't have a place to stay. I was lost. And 5 years of that's a long time. So it's hard to put it out.
Well, I really thank you for doing it.
This wasn't easy.
I'm sure.
I had one last question. I wanted to know how you react or how you interact with Holocaust survivors that you meet, underground members of the underground that you meet in this country. Do you find that you're able to relate to them well?
Some very well, like David. I have a feeling I understand him and I know he understands me. I mean, busy with the hundreds of people and he's standing behind the counter, we talked and we communicated. Some people actually, there is a certain feeling, oh, you did this and how was it for you? I am very interested with people that survive it in a different way than I did, like the people that were partisans in the forest. That was an experience that was different from mine. So when I hear about it or read about it, I'm very interested in it. Some people, the kindest thing I can say, I would say, I wish I have never met. Because they have an attitude that makes me very uncomfortable, and I wholly ran down. I suffered more than you did, and that's what I call professional martyr. They make something out of it that it shouldn't be. I realized that you should say it and you should, but spending the rest of your life saying it, that doesn't seem right to me. The Germans wanted us in concentration camps. We, by the grace of God, survived and got out. Why spend the rest of the life in it, where the Germans wanted so desperately put us? Seems like a waste of a good life.
I've got another question. I had another question.
That's all right. You remembered and you thought it happens to me.
Now I remember. I get the feeling you had a choice that you could leave Poland or work with the underground.
Yeah, that was very hard. When I was leaving Krakow, going on my way to Germany to go to Denmark. I cried. I mean, everybody else would have been delighted I'm getting out of this hell. But I was leaving everything that first of all, I had a feeling that that's it, that I'm leaving. I don't know why, because basically, the war mentality was, when the war ended, we go back to our homes, to our life, to our relatives. We all go back to what it was. For some reason, I don't know, it wasn't thought out. It was a feeling that that's it, that's the end of my life in Poland. And although I went back, but I went back, let's face it, as a tourist, not to go back to live there. I cried. I was leaving my friend from the underground. I was leaving a place I grew up, country I loved, everything. I was going in an unknown and conscious or subconscious feeling that I will never go back. I was very unhappy. Whether many people would say this is hell, the German occupation, I mean, rejoice. I rejoiced when I got to Copenhagen and I was served an incredible dinner by my uncle, and people were behaving like, dressed up, eating in a restaurant, good food, drinking, being polite to each other. That I rejoiced. But leaving Poland was great deal of unhappiness. I didn't want to. I wanted to stay and fight, finish this off. Of course I couldn't, and I knew it, that I became more of a burden for the underground than help, because they had to help me hide, they would have to, I was burned out. I was too well known and the whole thing, that I was not an asset anymore.
Do we have time to set up for that book? Maybe Janina could tell us.
Would we stop for a
Take
minute?
her to it.
Okay.
This is a book about Auschwitz, painting and sculpture and graphics from the concentration camp.
Sean.
Never again,
Wait a minute.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
never again in Oświęcim, z Auschwitz. They are different prisoners which a lot of this, especially graphics, were made in concentration camp, finished later, or smuggled out.
So they were drawn in the concentration
Yes. Some of them are smuggled.
camp? Mhm.
Some of them they had little drawings which they worked on. Most of them were made there.
And they're all different artists.
Many
Many
different.
different artists.
One or two maybe they have more than one drawing, but they are many different artists.
I'm going to shove it over, Sean.
Since there is only photography from concentration camps was taken by the Gestapo for their fun and amusement and entertainment. Those are the only documents. Few other books are, but this is one of the few books that are documents made not by the Germans but by the prisoners. And they're actually documents of cruelty, inhumanity, death, destruction. The amazing part of it is that they survived at all, because they were very difficult to smuggle out. The Germans were not exactly happy about things like that. I understand that drawings and graphics were sewn into old clothes and smuggled as a lining of, since prisoners often to protect themselves from cold used paper to line their clothes. They lined it with the drawing, and that's how they got.
What does that say?
The last step. The final step.
This is modern art now, right?
Never again.
Is that what that says? Never
Yes.
again? That's it.